The listening section of the TOEFL measures a test taker's ability to comprehend conversations and lectures in English. There will be a conversation and 2 lecture-based passages included in this practice. After listening to each recording, you will then answer a few questions about it. You are allowed to take notes of important details while listening to the recording. You may also use your notes while answering questions to help you figure out answers more accurately. The questions will be narrated. For questions that require replaying of a part of a conversation or lecture, you will see a headset icon beside the direction. This means that you have to wait for the replayed part before answering the question. After you are done answering all the questions, an answers and explanations part will follow for you to check how well you did with the practice and to better understand how an answer to a question is determined.
Listen to a conversation between a student and a professor.
Professor Taggart, I've got something I really need to chat with you about.
Sure. What can I do for you?
David Reynolds. I'm in your History 202 class.
Yes, Mr. Reynolds. You always sit in the front row, right? I'm generally awful with names, but I never forget a face.
Yes, ma'am. Thanks for noticing.
Okay, so what's so urgent that you need to talk to me about? Is it about next week's term paper?
No, that paper is going quite well. As a matter of fact, I'm almost finished. However, I have a question about something else. It's about this Friday's test. You know, the one on Britain in the 16th and 17th centuries.
I hope you've been studying hard for it. It's never an easy one.
Oh, I've been studying for it day and night, but there's something of a problem. I went to the library to check out that book on Sir Francis Bacon you put on reserve.
Yes, good thinking. You'll need to know all about him for the test, if you know what I mean.
Yes. Well, the book's not there, and neither are the pictures of Bacon you put on reserve.
What do you mean, it's not there?
That's exactly what I mean. It's not in the library. The woman at the reserve desk couldn't find the material. She wasn't particularly useful either, to put it diplomatically. Actually, she barely even looked for any of the things I asked for, and then she just told me to talk to you.
Well, I'll have to go have a chat with her then.
Okay then, what I was wondering was, if it would be all right if you, delayed the test for a week or so?
Why would I do that?
I get the impression that there are going to be a lot of questions about Bacon on the test, but if the reserve book is missing, there's no way we can learn as much about him as we should.
Well, I must admit that you make a compelling argument.
Thank you, Professor Taggart. I knew that you'd see things my way if I just got a chance to speak with you.
But I'm sorry to say that I must disagree with you. You see, while that book is important, and Bacon himself is most assuredly important, the library has a plethora of books on Bacon in its holdings.
Pardon me? I don't get what you're trying to say.
Mr. Reynolds, try checking out another book on Bacon. Remember, my class isn't a seminar, so you don't need to know everything about Bacon's life. Any number of books in the library's collection will tell you everything you need to know about him for this test.
Yes, I think I understand now.
Good. Now, why don't we both go to the library? You can check out a book on Bacon. I'll give you the titles of some good ones on the way there, and I'm going to chat with the librarian. Oh, and the test is still on for Friday.
Yes, ma'am. Thanks a lot.
Now get ready to answer.
Number 1. Why does the student visit the professor's office? Number 2. What does the student say about his term paper? Number 3. Listen again to part of the conversation. Then answer the question.
Oh, I've been studying for it day and night, but there's something of a problem. I went to the library to check out that book on Sir Francis Bacon you put on reserve.
Ah, yes, good thinking. You'll need to know all about him for the test, if you know what I mean.
What does the professor imply when she says this?
You'll need to know all about him for the test, if you know what I mean.
Number 4. What is the student's opinion of the librarian? Number 5. Why did the professor turn down the student's request?
Listen to a lecture in an environmental science class.
The world's ocean level rises and falls daily. This action is called the tide, as you no doubt already know. Typically, the tide rises and falls twice a day, but it may happen only once a day in some places. Tides usually rise and fall over the course of many hours. When the water level begins rising or falling, this is called the turning of the tide. The time it takes for the tide to rise and fall varies from place to place, but, like I just said, most places experience 4 changes a day. Additionally, one low tide is lower than the other and is called the lower low tide. Got that? Excellent. So, why do the tides occur? The tides occur because of gravity. The moon has a great effect on the Earth's tides. Think about it. The moon's gravity is trying to pull the Earth toward it, yet it is unsuccessful. However, the water on the Earth is not as resistant as the rest of the planet. Therefore, the water moves toward the moon. Of course, it doesn't go spiraling off into space because Earth has its own gravity, which is keeping the water on the planet. Nevertheless, the moon's gravitational pull on the water is noticeable in coastal regions where it manifests in the form of tides. The sun also causes tides in much the same manner as the moon. But despite the sun's much greater size, the moon has a greater influence on the Earth's tides due to the fact that it's much closer to the planet. Just in case you're interested, the sun's gravitational influence on the Earth's tides is less than 50% of the moon's. However, since the two act in conjunction, they can have a significant effect on the tides. Here's an example. During a full moon or a new moon, the moon, sun, and Earth are all in conjunction. That is, they're all lined up with each other. During these times, the gravitational forces of the moon and sun work together to produce the highest tides each month. These are called spring tides, and they happen twice a month.
I have a question. Does this mean that halfway between a new moon and a full moon that the tides are lower?
You figured that out rather quickly, Melissa. Yes, when the sun and moon are at roughly 90-degree angles to one another, which happens in both the first and third quarters of the moon's phases, the tides don't change much. These are called neap tides, and they also occur twice a month. Another question?
Yes, please. How big is the difference in terms of the height of the water between neap tides, spring tides, and normal tides?
Well, there's no simple answer to that question. I would estimate that the difference is roughly, let's say around 20% or so. but that's not an exact figure since the difference in water levels varies from place to place. The reason for this is that there are other forces which also affect the tides. For example, the Earth's rotation, the tilt of the Earth's axis, the condition of the sea floor, the currents, the depth of the coastal water, and the shape of the coastline. All of those factors play a role in how high and low the tides are. Oh yeah, and remember that the distance of the moon from the Earth varies slightly as it orbits the planet. Depending on how close or how far from the Earth the moon is, the moon's effect on the tides can change. Let's take a look at how the shape of the coastline can affect the tides. Up here on the screen is a scene from a port on the Bay of Fundy in Nova Scotia, Canada. As we watch this video, which has been accelerated to account for the passing of time, notice how extreme the tidal changes are. They're almost 20 meters in some places, making these tidal changes among the greatest in the world. See how much the tides are changing? Incredible, isn't it? Now, look at this map of the Bay of Fundy. Notice that the bay is long and narrow and shaped like a funnel. That's why the tides are so high. The mass of water in the bay has nowhere to go when the gravitational forces pull on it. It can't spread out across the wide ocean, so it causes very high tides.
There must be a lot of tidal power stations there.
You'd think so, but as far as I'm aware, there's only one small tidal power station in the Bay of Fundy. Some people are concerned it may negatively impact the environment, so no larger ones have been built yet. Hopefully, they'll start constructing more soon. Tidal power is cheap and clean. Anyway, I don't want to get distracted talking about that. Let's get back to discussing the tides.
Now get ready to answer.
Number 1. What aspect of tides does the professor mainly discuss? Number 2. What comparison does the professor make between the sun and the moon? Number 3. What is a spring tide? Number 4. What is the professor's attitude toward the student? Number 5. Why does the professor discuss the Bay of Fundy? Number 6. What does the student imply about tidal power?
Listen to a lecture in a film studies class.
Now that we've covered Charlie Chaplin's career, let's look at some of his lesser-known contemporaries. The silent film era had many stars, both male and female. Among the greats were Rudolph Valentino, Douglas Fairbanks, and Mary Pickford. While none of them ever achieved the same fame as did Chaplin, nor did any of them have his lasting impact. In their day, there were three of the top stars in American filmdom. Rudolph Valentino was a major star back then. Valentino was an Italian immigrant who came to the U.S. when he was 18. After spending time in New York, he moved to California, where he managed to get some work in motion pictures. He started as an extra in silent films, but he soon became a major star. He's best remembered for his handsome looks, flashing eyes, and dramatic poses in such movies as The Sheik and Blood and Sand. Due to his Italian heritage, Valentino was often cast as an ethnic character, so he played a wide variety of nationalities. He was also cast as the romantic lead in many movies and attained a reputation as a Casanova of sorts. Interestingly, although many American women loved Valentino, a lot of American men disliked him since he came off as rather effeminate and didn't play the tough action heroes they preferred. Sadly, at the height of his fame, when he was only 31, Valentino died in 1926 because of an infection he got after having an appendectomy. Now, Douglas Fairbanks is often regarded as Valentino's opposite. Fairbanks starred in many adventure movies and frequently did his own stunts. He's best remembered for the movie The Thief of Baghdad, and also for his silent-era versions of Robin Hood and Zorro. Fairbanks was regarded as the epitome of the tough man of action and was revered by both American men and women. Fairbanks was rather multi-talented as he produced, wrote, and directed several of the movies that he starred in. Fairbanks was also one of the movie stars who founded the studio United Artists. D.W. Griffith, Charlie Chaplin, and Mary Pickford, who was Fairbanks' future wife, were the other founding members. The movie stars were, well, they were tired of being controlled by the big studios, so they, along with Griffith, a director, formed their own studio in 1919. A year later, Fairbanks and Pickford got married, but they later divorced in 1936. Fairbanks himself died of a heart attack in 1939 at the age of 56. He was a heavy drinker for most of his life, which contributed to his early death. Mary Pickford, Fairbanks' wife, was a famous star in her own right. In fact, she was far more famous than her husband. Pickford was yet another international star, having come from Canada. Remember that although Fairbanks was American, Chaplin was British, while Valentino was Italian. As a child, Pickford, her mother, and her younger brother and sister traveled around the U.S. seeking acting jobs. In 1909, she met D.W. Griffith and did a screen test for him. Soon afterward, she was being cast in many short movies. She often shot about, one movie a week. Yeah, they churned them out a lot faster back then than they do today. Pickford usually played the role of a young girl who found herself in some kind of trouble, but eventually came out on top thanks to her pluck and determination. In her first few years of acting, Pickford made so many movies that she quickly gained fame both in the U.S. and abroad. She even earned the nickname America's Sweetheart. By 1916, she was so famous that she'd gained some measure of control over her films and was also the highest-paid actress in the country. But Pickford was dissatisfied with how the movie business was run, which led her to become a co-founder of United Artists. She remained a star well into the 1920s, but the death of her mother and the subsequent deaths of her brother and sister took a toll on her. Sadly, she fell into depression and began drinking heavily. By the 1950s, Pickford was living as a recluse in her Hollywood mansion called Pickfair. I think you can see where that name came from. She died in 1979, but she never made another movie after the 1950s.
Did any of these stars make sound pictures like Charlie Chaplin did?
Unlike Chaplin, most of the silent-era film stars couldn't make the transition to talkies. Perhaps Valentino could have, but he died before talkies were first made. Pickford made a few sound pictures and even won an Oscar for one in 1929. Fairbanks made a few as well, but there really weren't many others. Why? Well, some silent film stars had voices that weren't suited for talkies. Others couldn't adapt to the new acting styles required for talkies. Here, let me show you what I mean. I'm going to show you some clips from silent films and some early talkies. Notice how different the acting styles are.
Now get ready to answer.
Number 1. What is the lecture mainly about? Number 2. Based on the information in the lecture, indicate whether the statements refer to Rudolph Valentino or Douglas Fairbanks. Click in the correct box for each statement. Number 3. How is the lecture organized? Number 4. According to the professor, why did most silent film stars fail to become stars in talkies? Choose 2 answers. Number 5. What will the professor probably do next? Number 6. Listen again to part of the lecture. Then answer the question.
In 1909, she met D.W. Griffith and did a screen test for him. Soon afterward, she was being cast in many short movies. She often shot about, 1 movie a week. Yeah, they churned them out a lot faster back then than they do today.
What does the professor imply when she says this?
Yeah, they churned them out a lot faster back then than they do today.